So here we are. Thank you, Karen. What do we got on the agenda here?
The question for today is, some people think that the rapture is for the Jews only at the second coming. Isn't the tribulation for the Jewish people? And how does Revelation 20:5-6 fit into the Rapture chronology?
You know, this is a very common question, which I think there's a lot of debate on this. But let's jump in for a couple things here. Is the rapture for the Jews only? And the answer would be no. For sure, the rapture was the first information on the rapture. The word rapture, again, we know it's in the Bible. It's in the Latin version in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17. And so the Greek word is harpazo. It means the catching away. And so when you see in chapter 4, verse 17 about those being caught up, that's the word rapture in the Latin. So that's where we get the word. And so we stand strong that it is in the Bible, as much as many people might say that it's not. And for the most part, everybody, no matter what people's stripe is, they believe in a rapture. They might say that I don't believe in a rapture, but they believe in the Bible, and so they believe in a catching away. Just the argument today is from different. Again, we all love the Lord. These different people that have different perspectives. It all comes down to the timing, is when. But this is an interesting question, and the reason why we want to discuss this is because people saying, isn't the rapture for the Jews only? And I would say that the answer is no, because when Paul writes, he's writing to the church. And the church is made up of Jews and Gentile believers. Ephesians 2, 11-15 talks about this new body of this new group that is neither Jew nor Gentile. You have Jews and you have Gentiles, but you also have the church over here, which is a new group. And then to get into that new group, you have to be, you can get people who are Jewish believers that believe in Jesus the Messiah. They now are part of the group. Gentiles who believe in Jesus the Messiah are now part of this new group. 1 Corinthians 10:32 also makes very clear that you have Jews, Gentiles, and the church. So the church is this new group of people that God is gathering, the bride of Christ, if you wanted to say it that way, in many ways. But Paul is writing to the church at Thessalonica, and he's describing the rapture to them, and then he even uses we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the air, that those that have died prior. So let me share just the chronology. Jesus is going to, when a person dies, Aunt Susie, she's a believer. She dies, her spirit goes into heaven, 2 Corinthians 5:8, to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord. Her body's in the ground. Paul says in Philippians 1:19-21, I desire to depart. If I depart and die, for me to die is gain. If I die, I get to go be with Jesus. That's far better than sticking around here with you guys. It's basically what he says. He says, but it's better if I stick around because I'll be helpful for you. But I want to get out of here. I want to go be with Jesus. And so this kind of gets into what we've described here as well. It's not soul sleep. For me to die, just a side note, why would I want to die and go to sleep and have no consciousness? Where at least as right now, I can have a conscious relationship with Jesus while I'm living. Well, it's not better for me to die and be asleep and have no conscious relationship with Jesus. Paul is saying, hey, I have a conscious relationship with Jesus now. For me, it's better to die because then I get to go be in his immediate presence and have this immediate relationship with him without this separation from our perspective. Of course, Jesus is with us, so we're not separated. From our perspective, it's better to die. And so in that regard, what the people who have died and are in heaven, Jesus says, at the proper time, the Father says, go get them. He says, hey, everybody, church that are in heaven, let's go. We're going to go return you, and you're going to get your new resurrected body that I'm going to change. I'm going to bring from earth. That's your body's been there. I'm going to change your body. That's 1 Corinthians 15. Their body's going to come out of the grave. It doesn't mean the graves are opened, but that body, God chooses to find it wherever it is. Maybe it's been cremated. Maybe it's out in the ocean. We don't know. God doesn't care. But he's going to take those materials and he's going to reconstitute it and he's going to create a resurrection glorified body. So they come out of heaven. Their bodies come wherever it is and they re-enter their new glorified body. Well, that's going to happen in the clouds. Well, then we who are alive and remain, according to 1 Corinthians 15, our body now is changed in a moment, but then we ascend into heaven, into the clouds, I'll say. We ascend into the clouds to join this group. So the fact is the rapture for the Jews only? No, not at all. In fact, it's for the church, which it includes Jewish believers, but it also includes Gentile believers. However, I'm wondering if they bring up the tribulation period. Isn't the tribulation period for the Jews? And the answer for that is yes, partially. The primary reason for the tribulation period, Jeremiah 30, verse 7, it's a time of Jacob's trouble, and Jacob will be saved out of it. And so we know in Zechariah 13, 8, 9, that 2/3 of the Jewish people will perish, sadly. 1/3 will be refined, and that they will be the Jewish remnant at the end of the tribulation. And so what you do have is God doing a variety of things in the tribulation. The primary focus, not the only, is to have the Jewish people come to salvation.
Right.
Again, that's Jesus said in Matthew 23, that 37 through 39, you'll not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So the goal is to get the Jewish people to call out on the name of Jesus. And that'll happen by the end. But God is also saving tribulation saints, those that, when the rapture happens, all believers are removed off the earth. But then God saves 144,000, and then other people get saved, many people that we probably know that didn't listen to us sharing the gospel with them. Sadly, that they, hopefully, prayerfully, they would get saved afterwards. Yeah. So you're going to have Gentiles being saved, and then you're going to have the Jews going through the process of the whole tribulation. But at the end of the tribulation, I'll read a passage, and this is where the confusion comes. In Matthew 24, 29, Jesus is giving the whole scope of events from his departure in the first century until his return at the second coming after the tribulation. This is immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. That doesn't mean every last person's going to mourn. It just means there'll be a representative from every family. Then all the families or the tribes will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So after the tribulation is over, the universe goes dark, which is a prelude to Jesus' glory. So if you have no sun, you have no moon, and you have no stars, and you look up and it's black, that would be very boring for me as an astrophotographer. There's nothing to photograph, right? But then when you see the glory of Jesus coming down out of heaven, that's going to be the new light. And that's the sign of the Son of Man. There's no mistake. As lightning is from the east, from the west, it's not like he's a secret coming over there. Some views have that there's a secret coming in 70 AD, or the Jehovah's Witnesses, he came in 1914 secretly. No. There's none of that. This is no secret. Imagine the blinding light of the glory of God, and there's no other light. So you're going to go, oh, what in the world is that? What's going on? Is the sun going supernova? No, it's Jesus coming back. But it says after the tribulation, he appears, he's coming down. And then verse 31, and Jesus will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So, if anything, I would say that this would be doesn't use the word harpazo here, or a rapture. It uses the word gathering. But is it similar to a rapture? I would say yes, because Jesus is going to send the angels to go gather the elect. In this sense, I would say that the elect here, at least is the Jewish people. Would it include other Gentiles who have become saved? Probably. Why not? I mean, it wouldn't bother me. It doesn't say, it just says his elect. The word elect in the Bible is the broadest word that you can use. It's synonymous with a believer. Noah was a believer. Moses was a believer. Elijah was a believer. Peter was a believer. The Jews at the end they're believers. It just means those who are believers. in this sense. And so if they say, is the rapture for Jews only? If you're talking about this one, which I think he might be talking about, and this is why some people think it's a post-trib rapture, because they equate this with the rapture because the word trumpet is there, and there's a similarity there with 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4. But this is talking about those that are alive at the time, that here you have the angels gathering the elect. Well, in 1 Thessalonians 4, it's Jesus gathering his people. He's not sending the angels out. So this is why we see a distinction between this event and the pre-trib rapture. But they also ask the other question is, what about the continuity of Revelation chapter 20 as it relates to the chronology? I'll read that passage here, because in Revelation 19, Jesus is returning. And then in Revelation 20, you have some events that happen after his return. The false prophet and the beast are captured and thrown into the lake of fire. So you have those events that are immediately after the tribulation. Jesus comes down and they're captured and they're thrown in there. It says, then I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received the mark on their forehead and on their hand. And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. This is specifically in reference to the martyrs who had died during the tribulation period. They're dead, but they're alive. They're souls, right? I saw the souls. So they're up in heaven, and Jesus has returned, and he sees all basically the disembodied believers who were martyrs. Well, they're going to be given thrones to rule and reign during the millennial period, but they can't do it without a body. And so it says they're resurrected. It says very clearly they came to life. Their souls were reunited with their body, which I would say here is a glorified body, and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Then verse 5, this is where the confusion comes in. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. The rest of what dead? Well, what you have for example, throughout the Old Testament, and I can show you here, in Daniel chapter 12 and also in John chapter 5, Jesus speaks about the fact that every single person that's ever lived is going to be resurrected. So have that in the back of our mind. Jesus has already taught this on other occasions. Daniel has taught it in chapter 12. And so the question would be, well, what about the rest of the dead? When are they going to be coming to life? And it says, the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. So then what he's describing now is he says, hey, the ones that were raised up, that were martyrs, this is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who has a part in the first resurrection. Over these, the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So again, he's describing, this is why we know he's not talking about the rest of the dead that are raised at the end. This is the first resurrection. He's not talking about them. He's saying that the rest of the dead who we think, they didn't get resurrected until after. But let's go back. The ones that are going to rule and reign with Christ for 1,000 years, he just described them in verse 4. They are part of the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who has part in the first resurrection. The problem that you have here is that people think in terms of first as in sequence. But the Greek word has the idea of, it can be sequence, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, all the way, or it can have the greatest lexicon ever, the BDAG, B-D-A-G, you can look it up. It has there in its second nuance that the word protes here has the idea of category. Blessed is anybody who is part of the first resurrection category. Blessed and holy is the one who has part in the first resurrection category. Well, that's clear, so that if we think about sequence, well, who was the first one that's resurrected from the dead? That would be Jesus, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. And so if we say that these people that were raised after the tribulation period, that is the first resurrection, well, then Jesus doesn't where's Jesus at in it? So clearly Jesus in 1 Corinthians 15, Jesus is, it says here, but in fact Christ has been raised from the dead. He is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. So Jesus certainly is the first fruits. He's the first one in this blessed category. So if we think in terms of category, which again is very much part of the Greek language, Jesus was the first one.
Yeah.
And he's blessed, no doubt. And then at the rapture, the other saints are raised from the dead. They're part of that category. That's awesome. And then you have the two witnesses that are raised from the dead in Revelation 11. They're part of that category. You have two categories here. You have a category that's blessed, which is for believers. You have a category that is not blessed. We'd call it the second resurrection. And that's why he says the rest of the dead that are not part of the first resurrection category, they don't get raised from the dead until after the 1,000 years is over. Now, I'll read you a passage which, to me, this creates confusion. This is the key. First resurrection and second resurrection. It doesn't, I know the language doesn't use the word second resurrection. It doesn't. But first resurrection is, again, blessed is he. Anybody who partakes in that category is blessed. Jesus, as we said. In Daniel chapter 12, we see a summary phrase. He says, many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. So he's saying there's two categories. One is to everlasting life, and another one is to contempt. Again, two categories. Jesus says the same thing in John 5:28. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming in which, and an hour doesn't mean a specific moment in time. We see that in Revelation 3:10. An hour is just a period of time. So people get stuck on that. For a time is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice, and they will come forth. Those who did good to a resurrection of life, and those who committed evil to a resurrection of judgment. What do you have? Two categories. And it's not that we're saved by good. It's just a matter if you, James chapter 2, if you have faith, you'll produce good deeds. And so what Jesus is saying, he's following the same pattern that Daniel did and Revelation 20 does. That it doesn't really discuss the chronology there, it's discussing a category. That there's two resurrections. At the end of the millennium, there's going to be a full resurrection. Everybody's going to be resurrected that are unbelievers. They're going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. The great white throne judgment. The great white throne judgment. The books are going to be opened, and all those people are unbelievers. And they're going to go into the lake of fire with a new body that is fit for that. And that's horrible. That's why we need to see people saved. Mm-hmm. But if we come to this understanding of this, we recognize that it doesn't necessarily contribute to the chronology, but it does contribute to the understanding that there's two resurrections. Yeah.
Fascinating answer to a question. I never saw that answer coming, but it makes a lot of sense. Thank you for joining us today for the questions and answers with Mondo. Be sure to join us again next time for another fascinating answer to an interesting question.